A German panzer commander stood in the smoke like his brain had hit a wall. Seconds ago, he'd been inside a working tank, steel plates, thick armor, an engine that could drag him out of trouble. Now it was a broken furnace, metal curled like paper, paint burned off in sheets. The crew that had joked with him that morning was gone, and the strangest part wasn't the wreck, it was the thing in the grass. He stared at it like it had fallen out of the sky. A short tube, rough-looking, with a clunky spring mechanism and a simple stock. No sleek barrel, no fine machining, nothing that screamed serious army weapon. It looked like somebody made it behind a workshop after hours. He picked it up anyway, careful, like it might bite. Heavy, awkward, crude, and he couldn't make it make sense. Because his tank wasn't supposed to die to something like this. If you like WWII stories that focus on the weird details people skip in school, hit subscribe now, because this one only gets stranger the deeper you go. What that Panzer commander was holding, what German troops would keep running into from Sicily to Normandy, was the British PIAT, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't modern looking, and on paper it shouldn't have been frightening at all, but in real combat, it was. And not just the PIAT. Across the war, German soldiers kept meeting a pattern that messed with their heads. British weapons that looked cheap, even kind of goofy, kept producing very real dead Germans. A stamped sheet metal submachine gun that felt like a pipe with a trigger. A glass grenade covered in sticky goo meant to be slapped onto a tank by hand. A cloth bag stuffed with explosive that could be built in the field. To German officers raised on precision and polished engineering, it looked like desperation. So that's what they called it. Desperate, improvised, temporary, and that assumption turned into a trap. Because Britain's ugly weapons weren't an accident. They were a choice, a way of thinking. And the first time many German troops truly felt that choice was in the Mediterranean, before the battles that get all the movie attention. Summer 1943, Sicily, a British infantry section is pinned down. They're stuck, flat ground, little cover, and a German tank is doing what tanks do best, sitting there like a bully, spraying fire, daring anyone to peek up. British anti-tank guns aren't always where you need them. Air support doesn't show up on command, and a rifle doesn't care how brave you are. Rifle rounds don't punch tank armor, so the infantry has to solve a tank problem the infantry way. A soldier drags up a weapon the Panzer crew has never seen. It doesn't look like a rocket launcher. It doesn't look like an anti-tank gun. He kneels, braces it, and fights to cock it, because the PIAT spring isn't some little toy spring. It's a beast. A lot of men hated it for that alone. He fires, and it doesn't fly like a real anti-tank round. It lobs. Slow enough that in daylight you can almost track it. Not a clean, flat, high-velocity shot, more like someone throwing something heavy with mean intentions. The Panzer crew expects a miss, or a harmless pop, because when the PIAT hits, the blast doesn't look like what they're used to from a proper anti-tank gun. It isn't always a dramatic fireball. A shaped charge hit can be weird that way. Less Hollywood, more physics. But then the tank stops moving. A hatch cracks open, smoke spills out. The crew bails, not calm, not organized, stumbling, shouting. Some are bleeding. Some look like they can't breathe right. And the infantry watching from cover realizes something at the same time the Germans do. That ugly thing works. Here's the part that confused German engineers and tank crews. The PIAT didn't rely on high speed the way many people assumed anti-tank weapons had to. It used a shaped charge. That means the destructive power isn't mainly about punching with pure velocity. It's about the warhead's design focusing explosive energy into a jet that can burn through armor. So the PIAT could be low velocity and still deadly, especially at close range, the range infantry fights at when it has no other choice. It was basically a spigot mortar system. The bomb sat on a spigot, the spring-driven mechanism launched it, and the shaped charge did the real work when it hit. Simple idea, brutal result. German intelligence finally got their hands on captured examples and stared at them like they were a prank. No careful rifling like on a proper cannon. No elegant, modern-looking rocket tube. No sign of the kind of expensive engineering Germany respected. Just a heavy spring, a stout mechanism, and a finned bomb. By their standards, it was backward, and yet the reports kept coming. From Italy. Then later from Northwest Europe. British infantry hiding in hedgerows, popping shots from awkward angles. PIAT teams firing from upper floors into thinner armor areas when they could. Ambushes at short range where a tank crew had maybe a second to react if they even saw the threat. And that's where fear creeps in. Not because the PIAT felt unstoppable, but because it didn't fit the rules German crews had trained on. A tank crew can learn to watch for anti-tank guns. You look for muzzle flash, for certain silhouettes, for lines of fire. You learn patterns. The PIAT didn't play nice with patterns. It could be in the hands of ordinary infantry, not specialized artillery. It could appear where a real anti-tank weapon shouldn't be. And even when it missed or malfunctioned, which absolutely happened, the fact that it might be there changed how German tanks moved. Tanks started acting jumpy around places that should have been safe. A hedgerow, a window, a corner, a short stretch of road. Not because British weapons were beautiful, because they were everywhere. And once German troops started adjusting to the PIAT, thinking, okay, we understand the trick, they ran into the next ugly surprise. Something that didn't even pretend to be classy. A submachine gun that looked like scrap metal, and it didn't just kill. It told German soldiers something terrifying. Britain wasn't trying to build the perfect weapon. Britain was trying to build enough weapons, fast, then put them in the hands of regular people and let those people do the rest. And that is a very different kind of threat. The PIAT rattled German tank crews because it broke the rules. But the next British weapon messed with something even deeper than tactics. It messed with pride. German soldiers were used to weapons that looked like they were built by professionals. Machined parts, solid feel, a kind of confidence in the hands. When they saw a British Sten gun up close, the first reaction wasn't fear. It was disbelief. The Sten looked unfinished. A metal tube, a side-mounted magazine that stuck out awkwardly, a bare-bones stock that felt more like a frame than a real shoulder piece. No elegance, no craftsmanship, no German-style engineering. To a lot of German troops, it didn't look like a weapon a serious army would carry into a firefight. And that was the problem. Because British troops carried it anyway, not as a temporary stopgap, not as a last resort until real guns arrived. They carried it because it could be made fast, in huge numbers, and it could spray bullets at close range where fights were decided in seconds. That's what Germany missed early on. Modern war eats equipment. It grinds it into mud, breaks it, loses it, burns it, leaves it in ditches. Every extra hour of fine machining and perfect finish is an hour you're not turning out another weapon for the next unit heading into battle. Britain leaned into that reality. The Sten wasn't built to win a beauty contest. It was built to be stamped, welded, and assembled with speed. If you could turn sheet metal into a working submachine gun and hand it to a soldier this week instead of next month, an item that mattered more than how it looked on a parade ground. And in the places where World War II was most personal, tight streets, hedgerows, forests, night raids, the Sten did what it needed to do. It put a lot of rounds downrange very quickly in exactly the kind of chaotic close-range combat where a perfect rifle doesn't always save you. German troops had their own submachine guns, sure, but they weren't produced in the same overwhelming numbers, and they weren't being treated as disposable tools. They were treated as valuable equipment. Britain treated the Sten like ammunition. If one was lost, another replaced it. If one jammed, you cleared it and kept moving. If one got wrecked, supply had more. And that creates a specific kind of pressure on the enemy. You're not just fighting soldiers, you're fighting a pipeline. German infantrymen described a weird feeling in close combat with British forces, being hit by intense bursts from weapons that looked like junk. It's not just that you're dying, it's that you're dying to something you can't respect, and your brain hates that. That mental friction matters. It makes you underestimate. It makes you hesitate. It makes you think the enemy is weaker than they are, right up until you're proven wrong at point-blank range. Then there were the weapons that didn't just feel ugly. They felt wrong, because some British anti-tank ideas weren't built around distance or proper engagement ranges. They were built around one brutal fact. Infantry sometimes ends up close enough to touch a tank. And if that happens, you either have an answer, or you watch your friends get crushed, shot, or burned while the tank keeps rolling. The sticky bomb was one of the strangest answers of the entire war. The concept was almost cartoon simple. A glass sphere filled with explosives, coated with an adhesive substance, meant to be pressed onto a tank's exterior. The idea was to get explosive force directly against the armor, not from a clean standoff distance, not from a neat, organized firing line, from arm's length. The reason this freaked German crews out wasn't just the damage. It was what the weapon asked a soldier to do. It required someone to leave cover and run toward a tank, toward machine guns, toward the tracks, toward the noise and heat and chaos, and get close enough to slap a bomb onto steel. From the outside, it looked suicidal, but war creates moments where suicidal and necessary start to overlap. And once German tankers realized British infantry might actually do it, a new fear entered the crew compartment. Not fear of an enemy tank you could see at a distance. Fear of a shadow near a hedge, a shape behind rubble, footsteps you couldn't locate. When explosives detonate against armor, you don't always need a clean penetration hole to kill. The impact and shock can create deadly effects inside: metal fragments, pressure, a violent internal storm. Even a small-looking blast can be catastrophic to the men trapped in a steel box. And tanks are exactly that. Steel boxes. That's why German crews could dread what sounded like almost nothing. A dull thump, a moment of confusion. Then the inside turns into a slaughterhouse. It's hard to overstate what that does to behavior. A tank that fears infantry doesn't move the same. It becomes cautious around tight terrain. It avoids certain approaches. It relies more on escorts. It hesitates at the very moments when speed and aggression are supposed to be its advantage. Some German accounts after the fact pointed to a harsh lesson. Facing British infantry often felt unpredictable because their tools and methods didn't match a neat doctrine. And eventually, German intelligence started connecting the dots. Britain wasn't failing to build refined weapons. Britain was choosing speed over refinement, quantity over polish, function over pride. Once you accept that, the PIAT makes sense. It's heavy and awkward, but it's portable and it's in the infantry's hands. A tank can't assume it's safe just because it doesn't see a gun line. The Sten makes sense. It's not pretty, but it's fast to produce and deadly in the ranges that matter for sudden fights. And then you get to the purest expression of the whole mindset: the gammon bomb. The gammon bomb was basically a bag of explosive built around a simple idea: carry a flexible charge and use it against whatever target is in front of you. Different sizes existed, and soldiers could adapt how much explosive they used depending on the job. Bunkers, vehicles, obstacles, positions. It wasn't a perfect, standardized weapon in the way Germans like to think about equipment. It was a tool, and tools are dangerous because they don't have to look like a weapon to act like one. German troops encountered these improvised explosives in fights where nothing felt clean. Urban ruins, hedgerows, fortified positions, places where angles were weird and visibility was limited. You can write manuals to counter a known gun. You can train soldiers to recognize a silhouette, but you can't write a perfect manual for an enemy whose whole approach is, if this doesn't work, grab something else. That's what the British arsenal started to represent in German minds: a mechanic's mindset. Not elegant, not pretty, but relentless. And by 1944, that relentlessness meant every close fight carried an extra question for German troops. What are they hiding this time? Because British soldiers weren't waiting for the perfect weapon. They were showing up with something that worked well enough and using it with stubborn creativity. In Part 3, that philosophy collides with battlefield reality. How these crude tools combined into a style of fighting Germany struggled to predict, and why the psychological damage lasted even after some of the weapons faded from use. By 1944, German troops moving against British positions didn't just scout for rifles and machine guns. They listened for the unexpected, because fighting British infantry started to feel like walking into a workshop where every tool could kill you. Not in a clean, by-the-book way, but in a way that made planning almost useless. A German officer could brief his men on known threats: anti-tank guns, mines, artillery patterns, typical infantry tactics. That's how armies try to stay alive, turn chaos into something predictable. But British kit kept refusing to be predictable. A PIAT might be waiting behind a hedgerow where no one should have a serious anti-tank weapon. A Sten might appear from a doorway in a burst of ugly, fast fire. A gammon bomb might come out of rubble like a fist. And even if the British weapon was crude, even if it had flaws, The big danger was that it was there at all. That's what Germany struggled to digest. The British weren't trying to win by building the best single weapon. They were trying to flood the battlefield with workable answers. So if one answer failed, another one was close. This is where the story stops being about gadgets and starts being about combinations. A lot of German after-action accounts didn't describe British attacks as elegant. They described them as practical, aggressive in short bursts, focused on getting results and moving on. A typical sequence could feel like this. British infantry opens up with Sten fire, not necessarily to wipe out a position at long range, but to pin heads down. When a soldier hears that fast, choppy spray, he instinctively ducks. In close terrain, that half-second matters. While the Germans are pressed down behind cover, the British shift something heavier into place. That's where the PIAT comes in. It wasn't a sniper tool. It wasn't a long-range tank killer. It was a close-range problem solver, the thing British infantry could carry with them and use when armor showed up at the worst possible moment. And yes, PIATs could misfire. They could break. They could bruise or injure their own operators because the recoil was savage and the mechanism demanded muscle. Soldiers complained about them constantly. But the battlefield doesn't care if your weapon is comfortable. It cares if it changes the outcome. So British infantry treated the PIAT like a crowbar. Not pretty, not fun. But when you needed it now. If a PIAT shot hit, a vehicle might be knocked out or disabled. Sometimes not with a huge fireworks explosion, but with a sudden deadly effect inside the armor. A shaped charge can do that. It can turn solid protection into a trap. If the PIAT missed, the British didn't necessarily stop. They adjusted. That's where the gammon bomb, this flexible, blunt force explosive approach, fits the philosophy perfectly. If you can't solve the problem from 20 yards, solve it from 10. If you can't solve it from 10, solve it from 5. To German troops, that looked irrational, like the British were taking crazy risks. But the British saw it differently. If you keep pressure on the enemy, keep trying angles and tools, you steal the enemy's ability to settle. And that's what German infantrymen began to write home about. Not the British have perfect weapons. More like, the British never stop messing with your head, because you couldn't know what the next corner held. And for German tank crews, men trapped in steel, the psychological burden was even worse. Tanks are powerful, but they're also blind in the wrong terrain. They rely on escorts. They rely on visibility. They rely on knowing where threats typically come from. British anti-armor improvisation attacked those assumptions. A tank crew might feel safe because they didn't see an anti-tank gun line. Then a PIAT round lobs in from a window. Or a bomb hits the hull from a place no gun could have reached. It forces a mental shift. The danger isn't always the big gun you can spot. Sometimes it's the ordinary infantryman who shouldn't be able to do anything to a tank, but suddenly can. That ordinary man with a cheap tool is the thread running through all of this. And it's the part German veterans had the hardest time admitting. Because once you accept that a factory-made masterpiece can be beaten by a stamped tube and a spring, you have to accept something uncomfortable. War doesn't reward pride. It rewards what works. You can see that in the numbers and distribution alone. The Sten became common enough that British units could saturate close-range fights with submachine gun fire, in raids, in towns, in forests. At night, situations where ranges collapse, simple weapons become very serious. And if a simple weapon is available everywhere, it becomes more than just a gun. It becomes a style of fighting, a style where British infantry can afford to be aggressive at close distance because they have enough automatic firepower in enough hands. Then the PIAT's real advantage shows itself too. Not perfection, but presence. Even with limited range, even with a heavy design, it mattered because it was with the infantry. It traveled with them. Every hedgerow and corner could hide one because it didn't require a separate gun crew and big towing equipment. That's why German tank crews grew uneasy. Planning depends on information, and British infantry kept taking away information. The threat could be anywhere the infantry was. And once German soldiers got used to that, the sticky bomb left a separate scar, one that lasted even after the weapon itself became less common. Because the sticky bomb wasn't just an explosive device, it was a statement. It told German crews, British infantry will get close if they think it will work. That's hard to defend against psychologically. A tank crew can steel itself against distant shells, but the idea of a man sprinting from a hedge to touch your hull, that's a different kind of fear. It turns every blind spot into a nightmare. Even when the sticky bomb was phased out in favor of better, safer anti-tank options, the memory remained. That soft impact on the exterior, that brief pause before something awful, that feeling that armor isn't safety, it's confinement. And then the gammon bomb brings it all together. German troops found them in places that made no sense. Abandoned positions, ruined buildings, captured kits. And the unsettling part wasn't just the explosive, it was the lack of uniformity. With artillery, you can sometimes sense patterns, ranges, timings, likely target areas. You can take cover and hope the math favors you. But a man with a bag of explosive is not math. A man is choice. He can come from the wrong angle. He can wait. He can throw or place. He can adjust the amount of explosive to the target. And he doesn't need a factory-perfect design to do damage. That's why, late in the war, German veterans started describing British weapons with this weird mix of mocking and respect. They'd still call them crude. They'd still joke about how ugly they looked, but the laughter changed. At first, those weapons were a punchline. Then they were a problem. Then they were a warning. And the warning was simple. Don't underestimate ugly if it kills you just the same. When German officers and planners later tried to explain defeat, they pointed to big-picture issues: resources, air power, strategic overreach, too many fronts. All true, but the men who fought British infantry up close often remembered a more personal lesson. They remembered the PIAT, the weapon that looked like it shouldn't work, but still turned tanks into burning wrecks at close range. They remembered the Steen, the metal tube that looked like junk, yet filled alleyways and hedgerows with deadly bursts. They remembered the sticky bomb and the gammon bomb, proof that British soldiers would use whatever worked, even if it meant getting dangerously close. And that's the point Germany didn't fully grasp until it was too late. Britain's improvised arsenal wasn't a sign of collapse. It was a weaponized mindset, a choice to value speed over beauty, output over pride, results over reputation. Germany built masterpieces. Britain built mountains of good enough. And when those mountains of functional ugliness spread across the battlefield, when they ended up in the hands of ordinary men who refused to stop, Germany discovered a nasty truth about war. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the best designed one. It's the one you didn't believe could work at all.